The Pokemon world has numerous stories to tell us, often in unexpected corners and through details that would go unnoticed by most people. A great example of this are trainer classes. Beyond their dialogues or appearance, it's the Pokemon with them that tell us everything we need to know. Take interviewers as an example, a pair made up of a reporter and a cameraman who are always with Pokemon capable of imitating speech, perhaps even doing some sections of their program themselves. Electric and sound-related Pokemon to help with the recording, and for some reason, Mr. Mime and Match'em? Well, it makes more sense than it sounds, considering that given the opportunity to interview some of the biggest celebrities in the world, they could act as security staff and put up barriers to the waves of fans and spontaneous individuals that might show up. Or burglars. In battle, they usually use coughing to throw a smokescreen to escape from the authorities if they're caught red-handed, but they specialize mostly in fire-type Pokemon. With Western localizations, the true origin of this trainer class was lost because their name in Japanese is post-fire burglars. Since Japan is a country that historically has suffered an abnormal amount of these in large urban centers, where people began to appear looking for loot in the remains of houses, especially for valuable metals that have always been in short supply in Japan. That's why they use fire-type Pokemon that can help them smelt anything they find to carry the riches more easily. Perhaps they even have something to do with the propagation of fires. They even wear smoke masks. What about jugglers? They use Pokemon also very suitable for their activities like Voltorbs, Electrodes, and other spherical ones, but also psychic-type Pokemon that would help them with their psychokinesis to make the shows more colorful and spectacular. But there's one exception. Fritz, whom we can find in the SS Aqua, has a Mr. Mime, a Magmar, and a Machoke, a Mime, a Fire Eater, and a Muscle Man who would complete his circus show around the world. That's why we found him in the middle of a trip. He's an international star. But the most interesting thing about jugglers is that they illustrate how trainer classes are not just about their teams, but also about their battle style. In the first gen, jugglers were one of the few trainers able to switch Pokemon. Specifically, each turn they had a 25% chance to switch, emulating the idea that they are juggling with Pokeballs during the battle. The Battle Frontier, a place where the best Pokemon trainers fight for glory, fair and square, right? Well, there's always been an aura of something weird going on there, no matter the generation, even in their equivalents in other regions. Percentages and luck in Pokemon already works oddly, with supposedly very precise moves that seem to miss more than hit and vice versa. But the Battle Frontier goes one step further, and anyone who has reached advanced stages of the challenge knows it. How to forget when the quick claws of the opponents are activated several times in a row at the decisive moment, or how infamous Pokemon do one-hit knockout moves with a frequency that is not even half normal. It really feels as if the universe is conspiring against the player. But there is no evidence of any of this. It's all paranoia, probably derived from the mental exhaustion that comes with such a hell of consecutive attempts. Right? If one had to choose the most broken ability in the history of the games, a clear candidate would be Wonder Guard. A Pokemon with Wonder Guard is immune against all damaging moves from a type not super effective. But one move managed to escape that fate: Fire Fang. Due to a programming glitch, Fire Fang can pass through Wonder Guard, which is 100% irrelevant and went unnoticed as Shedinja is vulnerable to fire type, so it affects it anyway. But it did serve to bring something interesting to light, precisely on the Battle Frontier. Shedinja is the only Pokemon with Wonder Guard naturally, but if we use hacks to change the ability of a Spiritomb or Sableye to it, because they had no weaknesses in that generation, only Fire Fang could hit them. Now we can enter the battle tower with them and see how something incredible happens. At some point, an abnormal amount of Pokemon with that move starts to appear, as well as Foresight, Mold Breaker, status moves, and everything that can hurt it. Despite everything becomes much more frequent than normal, as if indeed the game was trying to adapt to the situation to put the player at the maximum possible disadvantage. So yeah, this curious episode would confirm that it's no coincidence that the matchups are increasingly unfavorable for us. The game somehow achieves that, and if that's suspicion has ended up being true, who knows if the rest could be too, that the objects of the opponents are activated more than usual, that their moves hit too much, and that the ways that this legendary challenge has to push the player to the limits beyond our imagination. Red, the avatar that we embodied in the first steps of our journey, and 3 years later, the one we had to face, proving that we have learned things in this time and are better versions of ourselves now. That explains his most well-known and notable trait, his silence. The same way that the player doesn't speak as such during the game, just some fleeting thoughts when interacting with certain elements. Whenever we cross paths with him, his dialogue is summarized in some dramatic ellipsis. Or so it was originally, because, contrary to popular belief, Red has left some quotes for posterity in his many appearances. With the obvious exception of Pokemon Origins and manga versions, and limited to official games only, there are specifically 3 times that we have seen him speak, or at least it's implied that he has done so. The first one is precisely in Kanto. The copycat girl in Saffron City imitates him so well that the game interprets that it's the player who is talking, and she can't imitate him without having heard him before. So maybe this Easter egg means that the player does talk normally to other NPCs, but the game doesn't show it for some reason. The second one is also quite interesting and unique to the Spanish version of Heart Gold. In this localization, when the opponent uses an item, he says in first person he's going to use it, and indeed Red does it too. But enough tricks, because the last time Red spoke, he did it in his own voice and without weird stuff. This time in Pokemon Masters. During most of his events, he remains as silent as ever. But when Flint asks him how on earth he gives orders to his Pokemon if he never speaks, he replies with undoubtedly his most epic and memorable quote in all these years. Words are unnecessary. The Pokemon universe is today a monster of infinite tentacles in constant expansion. But there have been many turning points in which, if it weren't for a remote event, almost a miracle, nothing would have ended up being the same. And the prime example of this is Mew. A lot has been said about it at this point, like how it was not made as one of the original Pokemon and was introduced at the last minute as a kind of joke, which would eventually lead to endless rumors that saved the series from disaster. There are even more technical aspects about it, such as the fact that its ability to learn all the moves at the start had nothing to do with its origin of being the ancestor of all Pokemon, but precisely to that shortage of space even to program its attacks, which ended up determining its concept in the world. But it seems that no matter how many years go by, this little guy keeps surprising us, leaving us speechless and taking its legend even further. Shigeki Morimoto, creator of Mew, and one of the people most involved in its final inclusion in the games, gave some details of the story many years later in an interview which had very little impact, but brought to light incredible details that further increase its legend. Apparently, Mew was going to be just that, a legend rather than a Pokemon. The games make reference to its supposed existence, but it wasn't going to be a species as such, with a design, stats, or anything tangible associated with it, but rather an ethereal figure said to have existed, something like the original dragon of the 5th generation. An abstract concept to make sense of the game's lore. A Pokegod. Mewtwo was originally designed precisely as a vulgar attempt of the human being to get closer to that idea of God. That's why their story ended so badly. But in the end, the game left that free space that could lead to problems, and it turns out to be more difficult than we thought, as there was no time left and something had to be added there. That's right, Mew wasn't going to be considered a Pokemon at that time or in the near future, but there was such a rush that they had to quickly change the story of these two, and Morimoto himself had to create a simple design for it without much detail, opting for a miniature and simplified version of Mewtwo. Do you know what this means? That although the lore tells us that Mewtwo is a clone of Mew, in fact it's just the opposite. As far as its design is concerned, Mew is a miniature clone of Mewtwo because there was no room or time for more. And to think that something like that would catapult the series to be what it is today, the rest is history. a long history of miracles and coincidences that has brought us here today. Tell me, did you know any of these? Do you want to know more interesting facts about Pokemon? Check out some of my other videos where we explore many more mysteries and incredible secrets. I'll see you soon.